Second ruling on homelessness in many years, the Supreme Court says cities can ban homeless encampments, a plague that has engulfed communities across the country. The justices said a ban did not violate the Constitution's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment.
The 6-3 ruling that split along ideological lines was both applauded and criticized. KTLA's Angeli Kakade joins us from Hollywood with reaction to the ruling. Angeli.
Well, Micah and Cher, we're on Hollywood Boulevard where there's an encampment just across the street from us. We spoke to people who live in the area off camera who said they agree with the ruling. In a 6-3 decision today, the Supreme Court ruled to allow cities on the West Coast to criminalize people sleeping on city streets. Anti-camping laws have been in place since 2018. Earlier this year, officials in the town of Grants Pass, Oregon, argued against it.
The Ninth Circuit's decisions had tied their hands and harmed the very people they purport to protect.
Los Angeles-based attorney Theanae Evangelos represented the Oregon town. She says cities like Los Angeles, who have invested billions into the homelessness crisis, can now take matters into their own hands.
Los Angeles and other cities will have the tools they need to ensure that those services are delivered and that people get the help they urgently need while dangerous encampments no longer proliferate.
So obviously right now I want to think and talk about this homelessness issue. This is one of my pet causes, you guys. I really care about this topic a lot. And I come at this from multiple sides. I mainly come at this from a citizen of big cities. I live in LA right now in Echo Park, and there's a huge homelessness issue here. Famously, Echo Park Lake was swept of an enormous encampment couple years ago, and that was a real blessing for the neighborhood, to be honest. I lived in New York City for 10 years. I've lived in Berlin, Germany. I went to school in the Bay Area, and I've always been aware of homelessness as this blight on society and this sadness. And when I was young, the way I made sense of this was in this kind of typical leftist way of compassion for people suffering and compassion for victimhood. And in this case, it would be the victims of capitalism, let's say. People that have slipped through the cracks because the system is so unfair. Add on your racism and your sexism, perhaps. And how money is not evenly distributed or fairly distributed in our society, kind of obviously. I still really care about that. I'm a spread the wealth, Bernie bro kind of guy. But poverty does not explain homelessness, not in the least. Poverty has gone down in the USA, and it's gone up. And homelessness has gone up, specifically in California. You know, in preparation for all this, I've been researching this, and I have all these like different graphs and stuff that I could talk about. And a lot of this comes from the work of Michael Schellenberger, who wrote San Francisco, which is an excellent book that I've read. He's a Bay Area guy too, and he comes at this from a similar lifelong leftist, compassionate perspective. But the question that we have to ask ourselves is it actually compassionate to let people sleep on the streets? And I would say no, it's not compassionate to do that. And I'm kind of tired of this rhetoric that somehow it's the right thing to do to live and let live, which is like very much my motto in life, to just let our sidewalks and parks be taken over by vagrants. And I'm using the word vagrants not disparagingly, but I don't think that homelessness is a very accurate word. I think it's a euphemism, because this epidemic we have of people on the streets taking up space, being filthy and dangerous, is an epidemic of drug abuse and mental illness. It's not an issue of not having a house. Houselessness is even more of a euphemism that I refuse to buy into, because poor people in poverty, do not buy a tent at REI and live on the sidewalk. Poor people in poverty in the USA live in very rural areas in the middle of nowhere, like in Appalachia or the Dakotas. They live in very blighted parts of town, like urban ghettos and decayed inner cities. They live in friends' places when they're transient and without their own home. I've actually been there myself, and I did not end up on the streets. I ended up in friends and family's houses, and they live in trailer parks and other kind of mobile homes outside of the sites and events and cultures of major cities. The epidemic we're having now, the reason why people care about this so much, is because homelessness has become a major big city issue. Women and children cannot walk on the sidewalk because there are tents everywhere. Is that cool? Like, do you guys think that's cool? Do you think it's compassionate to let them stay there? So this newest issue is that the Supreme Court has ruled that cities like Grants Pass, Oregon, Oregon in general is a very leftist, Democrat, capital D run state. Grants Pass is a small town between SF and Portland, let's say, and it has an enormous homeless problem. And it's been trying to address that problem by getting people off the streets. And the minor courts, appellate courts, district courts of this country and Oregon State have been saying, yeah, you can't do anything. You have to let them just stay there. It's their right to be there, and it would be cruel and unusual to tell them to leave public space. And this got kicked up all the way to the Supreme Court. And it's funny because this came up with my family and I. I was just in New York for my Aunt Daphne's birthday. And she's friends with Sonia Sotomayor, and I met her. And my brother's a lawyer who works in this space, actually. And so I made this kind of like quip about how I'm curious how Justice Sotomayor might feel about this encampment drug abuse issue, because it's like the thing I care about a lot. And he's like, well, it's funny you say that because they're about to rule on this, and they just have. And Sonia's take is that it's such a pity that the conservatives on the court are so out of touch with reality, I think was how he paraphrased her. And I just want to address this attitude that Justice Sotomayor has, along with my Aunt Daphne and maybe even my brother Phil, all who work in this legal space of protecting human rights and, ensuring justice for all, which I love. I love this spirit of the U.S. Constitution. I'm really into that still. But I just have to address this issue. What about the rights of everyone else? What about the rights of me and my dog to walk on the sidewalk without having to go into traffic? What about the rights of my girlfriend being able to walk to the market without worrying about like people shooting up or smoking fentanyl? What about the care of people living around a park that's been taken over? These are safety hazards. These kind of drug scenes, these open drug scenes, which is what they are, they're called homeless encampments. I'm going to show a video soon just kind of supporting what I'm saying here, because I've seen so much of it, and Michael Schellenberger has compiled a lot of his footage from San Francisco especially showing this. I'll show it while I'm talking. I don't understand what is so cool about allowing this kind of thing to happen. I'm going to hide my face here.
We would go all over San Francisco and find ourselves in situations that we probably shouldn't have been in. And I said, can we just put together kind of the greatest hits of what we did? And here's what he produced.
Broad daylight, I saw someone get raped.
I was raped, bullied, picked on, stripped naked, robbed.
Somebody get stabbed.
I mean, like someone robbed me with a machete today of all my stuff. Hit in the head with crowbars and bats.
I saw you get shot in the back of the head.
Somebody getting shot?
Do they live?
No.
You will end up getting hurt out here.
The other homeless people are like your worst enemy.
These people do not play out here. Besides, I have weapons. I have my protections.
Okay. What kind of weapons?
Bats, hatchets, knives, mace, tasers.
And what's your drug of choice, brother?
Heroin.
Crystal meth.
Meth and heroin.
Crystal meth.
Meth?
Yeah.
I don't know anybody that doesn't smoke.
You don't know anybody that doesn't smoke meth?
No.
We saw a woman who was pregnant just now.
Yeah.
What is she smoking?
Fetty.
She's smoking fentanyl, and she's 8 months pregnant?
Yeah.
So are you seeing more people showing up in psychotic states naked now than say 2-3 years ago?
Yes, I think so.
I don't know what they're putting in this stuff. I don't know if it was aliens. I'm not trying to sound crazy and stuff.
No, it's fine.
Must be causing all these like psychological breakdowns. And I think that they had put like a transmitter or something because I was able to hear and communicate, and it looked like I was talking to myself.
My job was to intake homeless individuals on the street.
I don't have to be on the streets. I just choose to be.
You just choose to be?
A lot of people are out here because they want to be out here.
Everyone's usually has a serious drug problem.
They kind of quit society.
This right now is literally by choice.
Did you get the sense that that cared whether they were on drugs or not?
No, and I'm not trying to be like crazy with it, but definitely not.
I mean, if we're gonna be realistic, they pay you to be homeless here.
They make it so easy and normalize it.
Drug dealers are just being let go over and over and over.
It's like the cops are, it's like they're your neighbor, you know?
They enable them because they allow the open air drug market.
Open street dealing like that, with the cops just across the street, like, watching them.
I think they've given up on the people that are out there on the street.
I've never seen anything like it, and I've been in the game for fucking 30 years, dude. Never seen anything like it.
So I'm looking forward to Schellenberger releasing a documentary about this. You know, I'm thinking about my aunt's reaction because I've gotten into these kind of topics with her, and I'm afraid that she might disparagingly ignore something like this as, let's say, I don't know, just like scare tactics from the right, conservative propaganda, something like this. And I didn't want to lead with that video because I do think a lot of people jump to something like, oh, this is just like a supercut of cherry picking terrible examples or something like that. And it's just not true. It's just not true. This is reality. Like, if you've ever been to Skid Row in LA, or just like any major city on the western coast of the USA, places run by capital D Democrats, like there is a very complex web of destitution, abuse, illness, and a homeless industrial complex. There is so much money poured into this issue that just goes into middle management bureaucrats to obfuscate this situation and say that we need more development and housing. Look, I love development. I'm a fan. Like, I think gentrification is a stupid word. Obviously it's applicable in many instances historically, but development, like taking a part of a city that is blighted and high crime or just ignored, something like Skid Row downtown LA or just downtown in general, this needs to be developed. Like, there needs to be things happening here. Middle income bourgeois normies need to enter this space and activate it in a positive way. There's nothing wrong with that. That's you and me, you guys. That's normal people like us. For that kind of space to be given to homeless encampments, all because, oh, they have nowhere else to go, it would be unfair. It would be cruel and unusual to tell them to go somewhere else. Fuck that. It's cruel and unusual for letting them stay there. Like, when I see this stuff, that's cruel and unusual. Like, how could we let that get to that point? You know what I mean? And the thing that I get really frustrated with on the left is how we just throw our hands up and we just blame capitalism, the patriarchy, society at large. Like, oh, there's nothing we can do because it's society. It's just capitalism's fault that things are like that. Nothing to do until we overthrow the government. Like, what are you talking about, nothing to do until we overthrow the government? Like, let cities like LA, SF, Portland, Seattle, New York City, Grants Pass, Oregon, do their jobs to police activity like this. It doesn't mean that you have to throw them in prison. This is the other thing. So I wanted to highlight, Daphne sent Justice Sotomayor's dissenting opinion here. And my dad was chiming in here because he understands this issue a bit. But Daphne says, I understand it's a complex issue with more than one side, but we need to find ways to address homelessness that doesn't send people to prison. Okay, prison is where you go once you've been sentenced for a high crime, not a misdemeanor. You have to commit a felony, and you have to be convicted of that felony, and you have to kind of have the book thrown at you in order to be sent to prison. Jail is different. Jail is where you go once you've been arrested. It could be like considered a drunk tank or a holding cell. I have spent the night in jail for nothing. I understand how unfair the criminal justice system can be. It's frankly bullshit and needs plenty of reform. But telling people to pick up their tent or move along because you can't park here overnight is not cruel and unusual. It's not sending people to prison. At most, it sends people to jail for the time being. In the USA, we have due process. Due process ensures that you are allowed a phone call. You're usually provided a meal after a couple hours inside this jail cell. You are talking with the police. This is not a federal prison where like you're gonna get beaten up and knifed or something by another inmate. That's not what's happening in these jails. You are usually released on bond, and you have a day in court. Now, there are so many things I could be pointing to. I guess I'll try and just go through some of these things. But the point is that homeless people don't go to prison. That's not on the table. Like, I think maybe a conservative argument is to send people to prison. I will show you how, like, in some of these graphs, you know, we have kind of substituted, you know, like in this one. Let me hide my face here. We've substituted mental health hospitals, like insane asylums as they were colloquially called, which we should bring back. We've kind of substituted that institutionalization for the prison institutionalization. So instead of putting sick people in asylums with, quote, healthcare, we are putting them in prisons. And that is bad. I don't want to do that either. I don't want to do that. I think that schizophrenics on the street yelling at everybody need social workers. They need halfway homes. They need to be provided support, wraparound services as it's known. But they cannot just be given a house. That is not how you solve this. You know, there are a lot of graphs here that we can look at. This is where Michael Schellenberger is talking about psychiatric failings of the USA. And, you know, when you're researching this kind of topic, here we have different kinds of studies, you know. So, like, when people say trust the science, I'm always confused by what they mean by that. Science is a method. It's not a god. We have 3 different studies. This is when the city itself, the homeless industrial complex, did its reporting. And the LA Times, an independent magazine or newspaper publisher, found much more than the city itself found. And then UCLA, which is ironically a kind of hybrid of private and public funding, it found even more than that, done by probably the most rigorous research. Schizophrenia is the buzzword health condition that applies to so many people on the streets in this kind of scene that we're looking at, which is just like awful, and I'm tired of seeing this in LA because it's everywhere. It kind of, like, health conditions like this can arise from abusing drugs. You know, I have friends that have lost their minds, that have like changed their brain chemistry forever because of drug use. I even would put myself in that camp differently, because I would say that hallucinogens have kind of changed how I think, or think too omnidirectionally all the time. So I'm very scatterbrained because of stuff like that. It's ADHD, but ADHD is the kind of thing that can be exacerbated by drug use. The drugs that are being done in the streets are fentanyl, which is an opiate. It's like kind of replacing heroin as like the favored downer, and meth, which picks you back up. And that's, so like when you see someone on the streets, they're usually like slunched over, like really zombie looking, and that's fentanyl or maybe heroin. And if you see someone yelling at everybody and swearing like with Tourette's, that's usually meth. We all, if you've been to a major city, you know what I'm talking about, especially on the West Coast. The thing is that on the East Coast, the East Coast has a shelter first policy, which means that it provides shelter, not housing, to homeless people with nowhere to go. Let me find that graph. I'm looking for it. Here we go. So like This is per capita. SF leads the way. New York is right behind it. LA is actually a little lower. But if you look at the green parts, that's what people really care about. That's what I and you probably care about. That's what creates blight in urban development, urban areas. It's like you see people decaying horrifically right in front of you. That's because they have nowhere to go. Why don't they have anywhere to go? Well, California has a housing first policy. So instead of sheltering people like that, we go on and on about how we need more housing development. And look, I love housing development. Like I was just saying, there's like here in Echo Park, there's like a lot of housing going up, and that's exciting for me. I'm a YIMBY. I want it happening in my backyard. I want urban density. I like that, you know? So that's why I live in cities I live in. But that does not solve homelessness. What it does when you create a housing first policy, aside from lining the coats of Democrats' developer buddies, is it just obfuscates the issue and pushes it aside, which is why nothing happens. That's why nothing is happening. Because people are saying, oh, just build more houses. Poverty is not the underlying cause of this issue. And it's not cruel and unusual to be like, look, okay, you don't have a home. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. You're not allowed to just take over a street. LA needs to build shelters. End of story. We need shelters, and I hope Karen Bass is figuring that out. I know that Newsom has figured that out after, you know, our major politicians in California. They're not tough on this enough for me. I think on a federal level, they're great. I'm looking forward to voting for Gavin Newsom one day for president. I wish he was going to be president this year. I think he's the man for the job. I support Newsom for president, even if I've disagreed with him about how he handled COVID, lockdown stuff in California way too strictly, and how he's, you know, addressed energy issues and shut down nuclear. Like, a lot of that bothers me, but he is a good politician on a federal level, national level, I should say. But in California, he's like really, you know, he's failed us as a governor, and he's trying to clean up his act before he becomes a national spotlight figure, because California has suffered so much with this issue under his watch. And I think he's getting the point now. I think his hands are tied by the ACLU and other far leftist organizations who just don't want to see progress in this way. Because it's so weird to me, this mentality that, you know, leftists convey of like compassion. Like, it's just not nice to tell people that they can't stay on the streets. It's so backward. It's not nice to let them stay on the streets. It's not nice to them. It's not nice to me and you when I want to show you around town and walk around. You think that's nice for us? Like, we matter too. Like, why? Because we're middle class? Like, we don't have, our problems don't matter? Like, what is that? Like, oh, they're suffering so badly, Keith. So just put that in perspective and let them stay there, you know? Let them sleep on your doorstep. Why don't you just give them your damn apartment yourself? Like, why do you get your bed and they don't? You know what I mean? Like, if you're going to use this logic of like compassion for everyone, like, I just don't understand the logic there. And I worry that I worry if there is any logic, and I want you to please tell me. You know, I'm not trying to make this video to just purely lambaste you for supporting policies that I don't understand. I'm trying to understand, like, why so many of the comments sections when I look at YouTube and beyond, you know, like, when I go to, let me just try this. If I go to Supreme Court homelessness ruling videos, and I go to something a little more mainstream, like, let's say CNN, or I was looking at one from like CBS, I think. You know, when I go to the comment section, it's a lot of people like drop rent prices, forced to play the game their way, land of the free, no actual Americans think it's ridiculous that veterans, so where are they supposed to go? It's like a lot of this leftist bleeding heart, like, compassion of like, oh no, they're like, where can they go? When you go to LA, like when I go to this video, which is from KTLA, local in LA, Now let law enforcement arrest and prosecute career criminals. Why don't the bureaucrats sign the docs and stop pulling up these 40-plus apartment buildings? No, I can't even want to push. Okay, that's more of the left. Party's over, time to go home. Vagrancy laws were always effective in combating homelessness. Like, this is kind of my thesis right now, and it's valid. Like, vagrancy laws are not cruel and unusual. It's not cruel and unusual to protect the common space. I believe in the commons. I think parks and sidewalks and streets are for all of us. And that requires protection. And a wealthy, functional government can do that kind of protection. It can ensure that we have a fire department and a police department. You're not allowed to take that over. You're not allowed to say that this public good is mine now. That's not how it works. And to say that a city like Grants Pass isn't allowed to, prosecute crime. I mean, I'm not even talking about the crime of loitering. I'm talking about the crime of like larceny or armed robbery or rape or, muggings. Like, these are the kind of crimes that will happen. I'm not trying to, like, again, I don't want to be this sort of like, I don't want to go on this tirade just like going on like an Alex Jones kind of way or something. I'm just saying that like those things do happen. Like, the facts and the figures are there. I'm not trying to like make this sound scarier than it is, but like I don't get how you can tell me that it's cruel and unusual to tell people they can't sleep on the street. It's cruel and unusual to let people sleep on the street. You know what I mean? And like the USA, you'll hear a lot of these kind of comments in here that the USA has more open houses, more vacant houses and apartments than it does homeless people. And that's by and large the case. That's true. They're not in downtown LA. They're not in Venice Beach. They're not in, they're not near Central Park, Manhattan. They're outside, they're like the suburbs, the exurbs of Boston, they're in the desert way outside of Los Angeles. That's where they are. And people can go there. If people need housing, they can go there. You and I we've all experienced this concept of affordability. When you want to move somewhere really desirable and you can't afford it, you don't just like set up your tent on that nice street because you want to live in that neighborhood. That's not how it works. And I think it goes into this larger woke ideology of like perceived personal truths. Like, this is what I think, so don't tell me I'm wrong. I get to do this because I say so. Like this snowflake generation kind of effect. No, just because you're homeless, I do have compassion for you, especially when you're drug addicted or, mentally off. It doesn't mean that you just get to tell me and the whole city and the whole world that your reality is what matters and that you deserve everything that you want. It's not how it works. And I'm sorry, like, I don't know why I, of all people, am like the one saying this. Like, I am like your prototypical starving artist, coastal elitist, slacker party culture guy. And yet here I am feeling like Mr. Let's put our feet down, like it's time to face reality. Like, this is bullshit. Like, our cities are a mess, and they're a mess because of this attitude. So it's not even that complex of an issue. People aren't allowed to sleep on the streets. You're not allowed to put a tent on the sidewalk and block the traffic. You're not allowed to take up entire parks for your open drug markets. You're not allowed to do that. End of story. I'm not saying you have to go to prison. I'm not saying that you don't deserve any rights at all. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm saying that is something you're not allowed to do. Figure out something else. And the city should provide a lot of other opportunities. Oh, so anyways, I'm glad that Angelinos here get it, that people in Hollywood definitely don't want to see this anymore. Why the hell would we? And I just don't understand why other like-minded people disagree. I think in New York, the issue is that you have a shelter-first policy, so you don't see it as much. And so maybe you should help us get a shelter-first policy too. Then we should bring back some asylums through, I'm supportive of universal health care. I'm supportive of legalizing drugs. If people feel like they're in criminal behavior by shooting drugs at all, maybe that's bad, sure, but the answer isn't to just give them free needles and let them take over Union Square or San Francisco. That's not the answer, you know what I mean? There's got to be a better way, and I think that the stranglehold that the far left holds on this topic is killing us all. All right, guys, that's it for now. Ciao.